The crisis of modernity is really the thing that we all think about going to sleep at night, but you don't think about it well. There's missing historical gaps, there's ideological drawbacks, there's just an inability to think logically about this utterly important piece of history that affects us so much. And you know what? Andrew Jones wants to lift you out of the squalor of your own ignorance and lead you into the light of Catholic revelation. And so now we present him to you. This Advent season, we are offering y'all an opportunity to get a bundle of Andrew's courses on church history that begin with the rise of Christianity, really going all the way to the beginning with Adam, the fall into sin through the age of nature, the age of law, the age of grace, the rise of Christendom, the collapse of Christendom, and now to the crisis of modernity. We're bundling this up. We're giving a huge discount on it. So much fun. I asked Mark, you know what, should we add the book to this bundle? And he didn't reply to me. And so I just took that as a sign that we're going to give it away for free as well. And that's what we're doing. So go to newpolity.com/courses, get this bundle, relieve yourself of your ignorance, do yourself that favor, and we'll send the first 20 of you a free copy of Andrew's book as well. All right, God bless and enjoy this clip.
As industrialization had spread in Germany, so did socialist ideology. This was a problem because socialism was spreading among the common people, who were the foundation of the state's power. Bismarck outlawed socialist publications and meetings. This didn't work. Again, mass politics was a tricky thing. Oppression often leads to the spreading of movements. Bismarck, however, was a master of realpolitik. If he couldn't defeat the socialists directly, he appropriated the most popular aspects of their political program. Faced with the massive and obvious injustice of early industrial capitalism, the workers were demanding reform. And in the new political reality, that meant state-initiated and enforced reform. This was why socialism was growing. The socialists promised the workers better conditions. They explained to the workers why and how they were being exploited and showed them a political path to improving their lot. Bismarck understood this. To steal the socialists' wind, he started building the first modern welfare state, within which the state provides basic social services and a basic social safety net to the whole population. This worked. The German state grew in power, and the German people grew in their nationalism. It was this nationalism that eventually mitigated the political significance of the Catholic population's religion. In a sense, Kulturkampf was a mistake for Bismarck, not because it was impossible to reduce Catholic loyalty to the supranational church, but rather because it was unnecessary to do so in such an old-fashioned direct persecution. This type of behavior was from another era, from the era of Joseph II or of Napoleon. In the era of mass society, you defeat opponents through culture, through a shift in loyalty, through the slow marginalization of Catholicism until it is just the private religion of some of your citizens and not a political force of any real significance. This was the real lesson from Kulturkampf. The Kulturkampf demonstrated that religion didn't much matter anymore. Nationalism was where the real power was found. Nearly everyone came to understand this. In the same period, therefore, the liberals became nationalists in order to advance some of their political program. The conservatives became nationalists in order to control reform and to retain power. Even the socialists found themselves becoming nationalists, increasingly giving up their insistence that socialism could only be an international movement and that nations were just a part of the capitalist superstructure. Nationalism, in its most pure forms, as was remarked earlier, should be seen as a new paganism. What became clear in the 19th century was that this paganism, like ancient paganism, was capable of incorporating a wide variety of particular ideologies and religions. This is just the nature of paganism. It is not transcendent and is not universal. It focuses on the particular and sees in them great power. Liberalism was a development of Protestantism, and it slowly became incorporated into pagan nationalism. Socialism was a heretical form of Catholicism, and it was more slowly and more incompletely incorporated into pagan nationalism, but nevertheless it was. Christianity itself, as it became merely a private religion and not a worldview, could be incorporated into pagan nationalism. Nationalism could accommodate these belief systems as long as their believers gave proper reverence to the nation and its state, which they were increasingly inclined to do. The state and nationalism became the glue that held society together. They became the true focus of unity. The papacy lost its state in precisely this period. There is a providential appropriateness to this. The papacy had needed its state because the states of Europe cared deeply about Christianity, which meant they would be tempted always to appropriate the power of the papacy for themselves. The papal state had protected the popes. Once the states of Europe no longer cared much about Christianity, there was really no need for a papal state, and so it passed out of existence. The papacy was no longer a sovereign Christian monarch among a Europe of sovereign Christian monarchs. Now the Pope was an independent voice among industrialized nation-states and the mass societies that supported them. This was a new situation. Mass society created a new political dynamic. Politics became both increasingly popular and increasingly ideological. To generalize, we could map ideologies onto a spectrum. On the extreme left, we would find the anarchists. Anarchists believed that all power structures were part of the superstructure of oppression and believed that they had to be destroyed in order for people to find freedom. After them, we had the communists, and then various types of socialists. As we move from left to right, we would come to the trade unionists and to the progressive liberals. Liberals and conservatives occupy the center of the spectrum. Then, as we move on to the right, we would come to the monarchists, the nationalists, and then to the ultra-nationalists who believe that nations are necessarily in conflict. And then on to the far right, we would come to the anti-Semites and to the racists. Racial theory was new in the late 19th century, and it was really an attempt to make nationalism scientific by incorporating Darwinian theories of evolution and the survival of the fittest. The political dynamic of mass politics tended toward the extremes of the spectrum in both directions. This is so because as the majority of the people fought it out at the center of the spectrum, they needed as many allies as they could find, and they needed to demonize their opponents as much as possible. This means that their rhetoric tended to adopt the more extreme positions from their own side of the spectrum, and they tended to paint their opponents as the most extreme elements on the other side of the spectrum. Everyone on the left became an anarchist to those on the right, and everyone on the right became a racist or chauvinist to those on the left. Over time, this led to increasingly radical ideological commitments as the extremes got stronger. The moderate nationalist liberals and nationalist conservatives managed to maintain control throughout most of Europe for the rest of the century, but political radicalism was everywhere on the rise. It was in this climate that the First Vatican Council was called. There had not been an ecumenical council for 300 years when Pope Pius IX called the First Vatican Council in 1869. This is remarkable when we consider the sheer magnitude of the changes that had occurred in Christendom during these centuries. No council was called during the wars of religion, during the period of absolutism, during the Enlightenment, through the entire revolutionary period. Why? The answer, at least in part, is that the Church's unity was severely weakened during these centuries. The Catholic Church was in practice divided up into national churches that were dominated by their princes. The Pope could not have called the bishops of the Church together without the permission of the princes. And once they arrived, most of them would have come as representatives of a kingdom more than as pastors in the universal church. There was a very real danger that the bishops would have tried to impose upon the universal church a Gallican ecclesiology. In the period of confessional states, an ecumenical council was a practical contradiction. The Council of Trent had been held before confessionalization had really taken effect. In 1869, the period of confessional states was coming to an end. The ideologies, especially nationalism, were taking the place of Christianity as the ideological glue that held societies together, even if they continued to espouse a more or less nominal Christianity. By 1869, an ecumenical council was possible again. The unity of the church could be asserted again, largely because the unity of the church didn't matter much to the independent nation states that were then emerging or being solidified. Increasingly, the church was becoming just another private institution that operated within the borders of a state. That it claimed some sort of special status for itself didn't really matter to those states as long as its members obeyed the law, went to work, and fought in the army. The heads of state of the countries of Europe were not invited to this council, as they had been to the councils of the 15th and 16th centuries, and they didn't seem to care. The papacy no longer recognized any state as a properly Catholic state, and the states, for their part, seemed to agree. There were two main issues dealt with at the council. The first was the relationship between reason and faith, and the second was the office of the papacy. Against the full spectrum of modern thought, the council asserted that reason and faith were not in contradiction, and that they, as the council wrote, mutually support each other. For on the one hand, right reason established the foundations of the faith, and illuminated by its light, develops the science of divine things. On the other hand, faith delivers reason from errors and protects it and furnishes it with knowledge of many kinds. The council refuted rationalism and naturalism with the assertion that faith was a necessary path to truth, and that the truths of faith were not available to unaided reason, and it refuted fideism, the belief that faith has nothing to do with reason, with the assertion that the content of faith was reasonable, and that reason itself was capable of attaining to truth, even some limited truth about God. The council asserted dogmatically that God could be known in some capacity through reason. This was an assertion about the very structure of the cosmos. The cosmos was structured in such a way, and human beings were situated within it in such a way, that we could come to know something about God. However, that knowledge was profoundly rudimentary. In fact, even enlightened by faith, our intellect was only capable of grasping the mysteries of God analogically and indirectly, and this limited ability was wounded by sin. Faith, then, was a remedy that restored us first to our natural abilities before elevating us beyond them. As the council wrote, it is indeed thanks to this divine revelation that those matters concerning God which are not of themselves beyond the scope of human reason can, even in the present state of the human race, be known by everyone without difficulty, with firm certitude, and with no intermingling of error.